everybody. Welcome back to the Fairview Podcast. I'm your host, John Spolino. I'm with our kids director, Beck Jones.
Hello, everyone. Happy to see you today.
What we're going to be doing today on the podcast is we are going to be talking about the Child Discipleship Forum, which we just got back from. We took a couple people from the church. It was in Nashville area. And we're going to talk about what we learned, some of the speakers, some of those things. But the first thing is this: what is Child Discipleship Forum? And
Well, I'm glad you asked, John. So it's a roundtable forum. So it's not necessarily a conference, though you will have speakers, right? But they kind of create the outline of the experience where you cover a topic or two, and then you have a discussion as a table of how you can implement that into your kids' ministry, how you can address that to your pastors or to your families. But it is all about creating resilient child disciples, but more specifically looking at the spiritual formation of what you are doing in your kids' ministries and what is culture saying and what can we combat with biblical truth, and how do we blend those two worlds together to just help grow our kids to become resilient disciples for Christ.
And how many years have we been going to Child Discipleship Forum?
I think this is year 4.
Year four. And I think they've only been around for...
They've only been around for 4 years.
4 years.
So we started strong with them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, it's always a blessing. We get to go every year.
Mm-hmm.
They have amazing speakers this year. The lineup was pretty tremendous.
Yes.
And as Beck said, it focuses on child discipleship. And by the way, if we say CDF, we mean Child Discipleship Forum,
That's right.
but that's a mouthful, so we may just say CDF.
Yep.
So let's kind of jump into the week CDF. What was maybe a highlight moment or favorite speaker or something like that
absolutely.
for the event?
So Justin, I'm going to mess it up. Whitmill early. I wanted to say another name, and that was not his name. I just have really enjoyed him. As a staff, we read The Common Rule, but he has a book out called The Household of Faith, and it talks about rhythms that parents can cultivate at home, and liturgies and those types of things. And just I just want to read one of the quotes that he had at the conference, because it just spoke to me as I'm thinking through how do we equip our parents. And it said, the power of formational moments is that God uses these things as moments of grace. So we want to think about these ways of loving him and loving each other. And it's hard and it's messy, right? Life is hard and messy regardless. And so can we utilize the hard and the messy moments of life to bring God glory? And can we bring the gospel into those moments to cultivate gospel formation at the dinner table, during bath time, during the bedtime hustle and bustle, or in kids ministry when we're doing transitions or vacation Bible school and there's lots of busy things happening? How do we bring the gospel into those transitional or those messy and hard life moments? So anyhow, I just really enjoyed his session. He's always an engaging speaker. He's easy to listen to, but he's got such wisdom, but he's able to bring it down to simple life practices. And so I appreciate that, because there are things that we can just implement right here, right now. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, he has a line. Let's see here. He has a line. We are always becoming our habits, and our kids are always becoming like us. And so it is focused on our habits, rhythms, the things that we can bring into our household and develop rhythms for discipleship. So my favorite speaker, I think, was Rebecca McLaughlin.
Okay.
So Rebecca, and this is not knock. Listen, Trevin Wax spoke, so it was fun to get to see Trevin.
You were great.
He's always fantastic. So Rebecca, if y'all don't know who she is, she has a really cool accent. I think she's British.
She is. Yes, she is.
I hope she's British.
Yes.
I
she
think
currently lives in Boston.
Yeah, she currently lives in Boston, and she does a lot on theology, and in this particular one, it was on Christian marriage, and I thought that was really good. The most impressive being that she did not use any notes.
Yeah.
That was just
that was
crazy. That was actually, so that was my favorite speaker. I thought she was super engaging, and her material was great. But what was your favorite, material out of, the whole entire weekend? What did you learn the most about? What was your favorite session from the 2 days?
That is really hard. I just feel like from each speaker, there was always something. There was one thing that I could apply immediately, or one thing that I wanted to stew more on. And how do we implement that in Fairview Kids? Or how do I equip our parents in that? Do we cultivate a class? I think George Barna was probably content-wise, which we're still waiting on the PowerPoint because he had a lot of data. He is the founder of the Barna Corporation, or Barna Data what is even the name for it? Do you remember? It's
Barna
just
Group.
Barna Group. Thank you. And so his data was just like, he even said, like, don't get upset at Awana. Get upset with me because a lot of the stuff that I have for you might offend you. And, you know, there was a quote, he literally told us not to take notes and only not to take pictures, but just to receive it. And they were going to send us the PowerPoint. But, there was a quote in there about how if we are evangelizing, but we are not discipling, we are cultivating spiritual abuse amongst the generation. And I just, like, that hit me like a ton of bricks. When I think about my youth group experience and how we used to do these big revivals and people would come to faith, right, in these masses. But then you recognize, like, life didn't change for them. So did they just get the out of hell card, right? Was this a genuine conversion? And then it's the same generation that is rapidly having these spiritual degeneration type of moments, right? Where they're just deconstructing left and right. And it just makes me wonder, like, man, that feels like such spiritual abuse. Like, I'm actually seeing it with my eyes now, and I'm having hard conversations with my friends or even some kids who are in college concerning that type of experience that they had. And so it makes me want to press in even more to, like, our starting point classes. It makes me, to Sean McDowell's point, I've kind of gone off topic. I told you there's a theme.
It's okay.
There's multiple. But Sean McDowell said up at the top, he's all about apologetics. So his session was on that and teaching kids apologetics. But he had said, ask questions. A question is almost always better than an answer. Create an environment of curiosity for our kids, which we do in Camp Fairview. But it made me even want to do it even more, right? To continue to ask those questions or ask our kids, well, what do you think that means? And we do that in waves, but it made me really want to say, hey, parents, when you're having those conversations or when your kids are asking you those things, why don't you revert the question back to them? Or, hey, community group leaders or Awana leaders, let that be part of our small group culture. Let that be a part of our discipleship culture, because it's not only going to test us to know if we know what we believe, and George Barna was talking a lot about worldview, but are we going to be able to equip our kids to cultivate that worldview and to be able to answer those questions? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think Sean McDowell said one of the best questions you can ask is, what do you think?
Yeah.
You know, so when they ask you a question, you may have an answer and you do want to teach on that, but first it's trying to help them formulate a process of asking questions and that kind of stuff. Let's talk about George Barna, because that, honestly, that session, the statistics that he brought up, which a lot of that was new that they were just releasing or are going to be releasing this week, was incredible, worth the price of the admission alone.
Absolutely.
And I want to focus on worldview for a second. He gave the statistic on worldview, and he gave us what the predominant ways people see the world, how they interact with the world, the collection of beliefs that they accrue, especially when they're younger, by the age 13, that influences the way that they behave and think. And he said that the number one worldview in the United States is syncretism, which means they're borrowing from a bunch of different things. The second was Christian, was a Christian worldview. Now, here's the question that I want to ask those that are listening or watching. If you had to kind of give a number percentage-wise, what would that be? Would it be 70-30, 80-20, 50-50? Like, I want you to think in your mind right now what that number you think it might be. I'll give you a second.
1 second.
Second is over.
Your second is
so
over.
Here's the deal. 92% of the United States has a syncretistic worldview. The next highest worldview in the United States, with 4%, is a biblical worldview, a Christian worldview that's based off of the Scripture. So that was alarming to me, especially with this follow-up statistic that 64% of Christians say that they have a Christian worldview, when in fact we know that that's not even close to being that. So I want to start there. What do you think about that statistic? What do you think about that conversation?
It was heart-wrenching. I mean, it's heart-wrenching when you think about that, because I think he later even said, and I'm not going to give the statistic because I didn't write it down because I wanted my PowerPoint and I don't have it yet. So, but he was even saying amongst church leaders, like, there is a shocking statistic that shares that even amongst church leaders or kids ministry in general, I don't know, was it 7 out of 8 something of that nature. It was just very close. Like as we were sitting around a table, about 8 people, we were like, majority of us may not have a fully Christian worldview at this table. That was so alarming and so shocking. And he had even said from stage, he's like, it's coming down to a point where sometimes when people are saying, well, what church should I go to? He's like, don't. But he wants you to go to church, right? But if our leaders don't have a full encompassing, holistic, biblical worldview, then what is actually being taught in some of our places and spaces, right? So that's just alarming, and it really like makes me as a kids ministry leader think through, okay, how am I going to combat that? What kind of questions do I need to be asking my leaders? What kind of questions do we need to be asking our parents? What can we do as a family ministry to equip our parents better to have those intentional moments, so we know that for worldviews, and y'all hold on to your seats if you haven't heard this, but by age 13, that's what, middle school, John? Mm-hmm. Age 13, a kid's worldview is almost fully formed. Now, it will change here shortly, or there will be things that are added, or maybe things that are taken away, but it's almost fully formed by age 13. So what are we doing in kids ministry? What are we doing in preteen ministry? What are we doing in student ministry to get ready to help cultivate and intentionally disciple and form their worldview? And that's even a question for my parents, our parents that are out there. What are we doing? What are you doing at home? How are you curating media? How are you curating sporting events and those types of things, social settings, their friend groups, to help cultivate a full-on holistic biblical worldview?
Yeah, he mentioned that by the age of 13, you will likely die with that same worldview.
Yeah,
that the changes and the switches that happen are so small that you will die with the worldview that you've developed by 13. And so I walked away from that session, and I wrote this down: kids discipleship ministry and kind of preteen ministry is the most important ministry in discipleship. And he talked about in his session that, like, how do you change the trajectory of of the statistic to make it that more people are thinking biblically and living according to God's standard, his word, and his plan for our life. So how do we do that? And there's kind of this impetus to go out there and make sure that we're evangelizing out there. And his main point was, no, you need to be evangelizing in here.
Yes.
You need to be focusing on these students, because the way that you help this is by focusing on kids and students now, so that in 10 and 20 years, they have that biblical worldview to assess, process, develop beliefs on, and to make decisions. There was a lot of other statistics in this time. I do want to talk about one that I thought was really interesting. He said from ages 1 through 12, predominantly, you are forming your worldview. Ages 13 through 29, you are refining and clarifying that worldview. So you see a lot of people start asking deeper questions in that time frame. By age 30 through 60, he said the main characteristic was transmission, which meant that if you're in your 30s to 60s, you're trying to find people who believe what you believe, because you want to feel confident in what you believe. And then he said in 60s, he says it's reflection, reconsideration. But here we know our wonderful 60-year-olds, right? They are just reflective. They think about stuff, but like they don't like. They're pretty confident in a lot of what they believe and moving forward. And so he talks about how, like, they reconsider, they reflect. They're a lot more apt to have conversations of challenge. But I thought what was interesting for me was that 30 through 60 don't really like the challenge conversation. They want to find people who agree with them instead of being challenged in their faith. Now, this is going to tie to something else. So I'm jumping to a different session here, okay?
I'm ready.
So I'm jumping to a session that we had with Mark Sayers, and he has a quote, and it was talking about the gray area. So we're living in kind of a transitional time period right now within our country and within spirituality and religion. And he says this, he says, the comfort zone is when you don't grow, but the wilderness is where you are challenged. And so his whole point was that challenge actually brings about growth and discipleship. And I think the way that we reach kids, going back to George Barna, the way we reach kids is also by having a strong discipleship ministry for adults.
Yes.
Because if we are not challenging the 30 through 60-year-olds, which would constitute a lot of our parents who have elementary and student-aged kids, student ministry-aged kids, then they're not going to be able to grow,
Right.
which then will funnel down to their kids, and allow them to grow. So those are some of the thoughts I had. What do you think about? I mean, I want to hear your thoughts about that session.
I mean, I think it's and both. Like, I mean, it's both. They have to work together. We have to be equipping and discipling our parents just as much as we have to be equipping and discipling our kids. But I hope and I pray that what we're doing here at Fairview is we are giving a strong foundation to our kids. And, I think we have some of the best child discipleship leaders, community group leaders in Tennessee and the United States. I don't know.
In the world, in the galaxy.
Yes. Just because of the way that they invest in their kids. They invest in our kids. They pour over them. They pray over them. They're asking intentional questions, and I'm grateful. And that was here before me. And I'm very grateful, and I'm very blown away by their dedication to kids ministry. But in the same token, I think, I have seen the influence of some of our parents on those kids' lives, whether that was in kids ministry or student ministry or just the warm and welcoming environments that we see here at Fairview. I just hope and I pray that foundation will continue to grow, right? As we see these kids grow up to be adults and parents, I think we're going to look back in 30 years and praise God for what he has done here, But I think it's in tandem. I think we have to provide quality discipleship material for both. I think we have to be shepherding and praying over both of them with such fervency of asking God, Lord, would you help us to not be comfortable, right? Because if we're comfortable here in the adults, then there will be the temptation to be comfortable in students or to be comfortable in our kids' ministry. And so I think it's an entire church body opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an endeavor that when we have strong discipleship ministry, we will see the ramifications. So I think even Tyler mentioned it yesterday, like when we asked our kids, what do you want to be when you grow up, or who do you want to be when you grow up? Right. Having them say someone in the church, that would be amazing. That would be wonderful to them to look at a mentor or someone who's discipling and say, I want to be like him or I want to be like her. And I think that's the goal, is to have such a strong ministry of forming and transforming into the image of Christ. He, in this topic of kids discipleship in particular, what are some ways that parents can start helping shape their worldview? And maybe what are some more ways where our kids and student discipleship ministries are helping to also shape worldview currently in our context?
I think it kind of goes back to Sean McDowell of asking questions, right, to the kids. It's like, well, what would you do in that situation? Or why did you handle that situation with your sibling, with the friend at school? Why did you choose not to do your homework, right? Why did you choose to do your homework, right? Is it because you are striving for perfection? Is it because that's what your mommy and daddy want you to do? Or is it because it's something that you feel convictional about, right? And teaching them what convictions are, right? Not just to kind of go with what their friends are doing, and that's a lot of conversation, even around the dinner table, I think, right? Of just making the most of those opportunity, parents, and even students making the most of those opportunities of really engaging and having those questions. I think also, I'm trying to think back to what he said. Because in my mind, I see a theme of spiritual formation. So even Jay Kim, who was there, he talked a lot about technology. And so seeing it as, like, technology is a gift, right? But we have to, reassess, and then also reimagine what we're doing with it, right? Like, just because we can move towards technology as fast as lightning, it feels, that might not be the best thing. That might not be even the right thing to do. And so what does wisdom actually look like? And so parents, like, this is a shameless plug for the book of Proverbs, but, like, Proverbs is very rich. It is very simple in some ways. And so I don't know if that's reading a couple verses here in Proverbs with your kids and discussing what that looks like, but cultivating what does wisdom look like over knowledge, right? Knowledge is good, but it doesn't change our lives, right? Wisdom does. Wisdom teaches us to lean into the Holy Spirit. Wisdom teaches us to choose the ways of the Lord. And so just thinking through that perspective, I think, would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we do in our ministry standpoint that helps the transformation is Awana. I think it's Bible memorization. It's getting together with groups of other kids your age
Yep.
and studying the Bible for students is getting together with other students and learning God's word, talking about it in your groups, and I
Yeah.
think those are all part of the forming stage.
Yeah.
I think from a home perspective, I think what I would maybe encourage some parents to think through is, what are you valuing and what are your goals? And so a study showed that George Barna gave us. I don't have the exact numbers, I just wrote it down, but it said that parents want their kids to be smart, happy, and healthy. Those were the number 3 things that they wanted for their kids, but it was not saved, Christ-like, and joy-filled
Right.
servants. And
Right.
so we have to ask the question, are the values that we are presenting in our families, first and foremost, ones that are going to form them into Christ and his character and the way that he lived?
Absolutely.
If that's not a goal for your family, then you're never going to be able to really produce disciples,
Right.
of your children, if that's not a goal or that's not a value. Bible memorization is a huge part of it. But I think when we talk about parents in their home, it's being intentional. So this is where Justin is helpful, Whitmill early, because in his habits of a household, he talks about the rhythms that you have. So he talks about dinner time in particular.
Yes, he does.
So I love this because he knows what it's like to be a parent who has a busy schedule with busy kids, and he's constantly doing things. He's a lawyer, by the way, so he's very busy, and he turns off his phone, which is awesome. But they light a match. So do you remember that section? What do
yep.
they do at dinner time?
So they have dinner, right? So his wife is, he's trying to be like, I'm going to be home at 6 for dinner, at 6 at dinner. Wife is getting everything ready, and the kids are like, I'm hungry at 3. And then they're, as soon as dad gets home, it's like they're not even hungry anymore, So they get together for dinner, they light a match, and they say, Christ is light. And of course, the kids are fighting over who wants to light the match and who gets to blow out the candle at the end of dinner. But it's just this mindset of like a simple reminder of like, I'm lighting a match to say like, this is a set apart time. This is a special time for us. Now, granted, are they still going to bicker? Are they still going to sword fight? Probably, because they're boys, right? He's got 4 boys. But they try very hard to ask intentional questions of like, how was your day? What's going on at school? But they started off with Christ is light, and then they pray, And so I think trying to make those set apart times for your families, or making the messy moments an intentional moment for God's glory. Even if that means parents taking a deep breath and saying a quick prayer of like, Lord, please give me your words, or Lord, give me your strength. Lord, help me to not, become a drill sergeant in this moment, right? We do have a resource at the kids ministry desk that's 25 questions you can ask your kids about church service or about their community group experiences. But I think you can also utilize that when they're working in their Awana books, right? Just asking if you're looking for other questions than just what are you learning or was it fun today. That resource is out there. It's actually put on by Child Discipleship Forum. /Awana. But it is a really beautiful, helpful resource to have that's going to offer you different questions, and you can just keep going, every day just pick a different question and be working through that as a family at the dinner table. It's laminated, so if milk gets spilled, you're safe, you're good. But I do think Justin really does bring such beauty and such intentionality to the simple things that we should be doing already as family units.
I loved what he said about, it may not seem like a whole lot, just lighting a candle and saying Christ is light, but he hopes that, when his kids are off to college, or I forgot how exactly if he phrased it, but when they light a match, just the cell of sulfur from lighting that match would bring them back to the phrase Christ is light, and be formational. And I think that's where like all the senses are engaged, right? When we follow Christ. And that's something that we try to be intentional on in the kids ministry, providing engaging experience through creativity and some of these other aspects. But I do find that the rhythms that he established and the consistency that he established to be really, really powerful and exciting. I had another question. Do you remember what it was? I don't remember.
It was something about implementation.
Oh, implementation. Yeah. What did you leave? Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha,
what was
brother.
something that you're like, I left this conference and this was something that I knew immediately I wanted to adopt or think through or plan for?
There's, again, so many. Again, George Barna. Also, I found all my notes. As I was reviewing for the podcast, I found more. So I took a lot more notes on Barna and Mark Sayers and the Gray Zone and all of those things. So, y'all, I'm sorry that I didn't continue reading all of these. There's a lot to say about what George Barna says and just the statistics. And so I want us to continue to think through what does that look like as far as equipping parents with worldviews, that type of stuff. But in the immediate future, so honestly, I taught Camp Fairview this past Sunday, and it was very much in front of me. Again, Sean McDowell, apologetics, thinking through how can I engage our kids more? How can I ask more intentional questions to get them to answer as they're tracking with us and that kids worship space. But it also even happened when I was hanging out with the Bristos over the weekend and James Michael asked me a question. I said, well, I don't know. What do you think? Right? So just trying to make that a natural rhythm, not to like discount or discredit my whatever wisdom Miss Beck has, right? But really just being like, well, what do you think? Like, I'm curious to know what your thought would be on that, and engaging them in that way. And it opened up the conversation, right? Because it's kind of an open-ended question for them as opposed to yes or no.
Sure.
And so if we can continue to integrate those open-ended questions, I think we're going to see our kids begin to open up more to us, which is going to help them in our belong, believe, become philosophy in our kids' ministry, right? Which is what Child Discipleship Forum kind of illuminates to as we continue to process all of that. But yeah, that was one immediate, quick, easy fix was like, let's just continue to ask intentional questions. I think another is thinking through the habits and rhythms of our kids' ministry, right? So what does consistency and habits, what habits are we cultivating in Awana clubs? What habits are we cultivating in community groups? What habits are we cultivating in Camp Fairview? Are they pointing us more to Jesus? Are they for entertainment? And if they are, then let's reimagine that, reassess it, and channel it so that it does help us cultivate more of a Christ-like worldview in them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's good.
So that's another one. Yeah.
Yeah, I left my one, well, not one, but one of the things that I left just wanting to see and implement is to think through our classes that we offer. So there was a guy who came, you could definitely tell he was a minister to preteens, okay?
Yes.
Even just from his demeanor,
Yep.
you could tell he predominantly ministered to the 9 to 12-year-olds in the room. He was so funny. He was really engaging.
Sean Sweet, right? Yes.
Yeah, Sean Sweet, yep. And I left that just really not only encouraged by some of the stories that he shared of these preteens, 9 and 12-year-olds, but I left with thinking through processes and specific, like how can we really engage this group that is awkward and is changing but we love them and we care for them. And it was like, how can we specifically minister to this particular age group and see them start to flourish as they come into their own, as they enter into their teenage years. And so anyways, I don't have an answer to that.
Right.
But I did leave thinking to myself, how can I really, and how can we really engage through this age group that can sometimes be overlooked, at least with the speciality focused on them. And so anyways, that's what I thought through leaving. And all of it was, it was incredible. And then let me just say this, because, Trevin was there. So Trevin shared with us about old truths to awaken young hearts. And he had this quote I wanted to share that I thought was really good. He says, "We've raised a generation who can win Bible trivia, but don't act or look like Jesus." And so that's the danger. And he talks about how church faces challenge, not when new errors win, but when old truths no longer wow. Right. And he used Deuteronomy chapter 6, which is a foundational piece for parenting. But when I think through this, we have to, when we talk about discipleship and worldview, the danger is knowledge. And they need knowledge and they need formation. When we talk about apologetics, all right, we're talking about how can I, not only defend my faith, but how can I know why I believe what I believe. Those are all really good. Yep. But if we separate that from looking and being with Jesus, then we are missing the mark. And so there's an aspect of which that when we look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, it is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that is the goal for all of this is love, loving God. And so we do apologetics so that we can love God better. We teach our second graders specific curriculum so they can love God better. We do starting point so that they can love God better. We do our midweek stuff so that they can love God better. And that will have a lot of different emphases and different methods will come along, or strategies or classes, or there may be changes in the way that we do things at points. But it's all because the goal is to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I felt like that was appropriate to end our time. Is all of Discipleship Forum is not just about knowledge. It's about how can we awaken our young hearts in our church to love God better and with a fuller heart, so that they can have a flourishing life in Christ. And
and I think so. He said, love is connected. Well, he said, why young hearts? These words are to penetrate your heart, right? They were to penetrate. They were to leave a lasting impression on our hearts. Love is connected to obedience, and obedience is done because of who and what we love, right? And so I think that's our heartbeat at Fairview Kids, right, is to cultivate this generation and Fairview students, to cultivate this generation to love after God and to love him not just with our mind, but to love him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that will play out as we hope and we pray a healthy church member, right?
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, hey, thank you for your time
You're
today.
So welcome, guys.
Thank you back.
Lots of good things, friends.
And listen, there were several that went with us to Child Discipleship Forum, and so if you run into any of those, please ask them how their experience was. It's such a rich time just to learn how better we can disciple our kids.
Absolutely.
But I always enjoy going and always thinking through how we can, as a family ministry, implement better, maybe better focus, a better strategy, whatever it might be, so that we can turn hearts to love God.
That's right. It refines us just as much, guys. And so we're grateful. We're grateful for that opportunity. So thanks for allowing us to go. But also, we're excited to implement and impart this wisdom that we also have received.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here.
You're welcome, friends. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.